Okay, so are we ready to go through our answers? Let's see, as if by magic. Woohoo! I love that. Okay, so what's the final thing I want my audience to do? Now, actually, in each paragraph, I'm asking them to do something really, and it's all led through my verb choices. So we all have a moral duty too. Now, that immediately means I'm introducing a choice, an action, a verb, in other words. So we all have a moral duty to educate ourselves. So the first thing is to educate. We all have a moral duty too. There's my next command: reject fashion. That is tainted by the exploitation of children. We all have a moral duty to stand. Now, the reason I'm drawing attention to this is that these are three verbs. Now, verbs, as we know, are doing words. They tell people what to do. And actually, the final thing of our speech is telling people what to do. So if you're planning your final section, think about verb choices. Now, educate, reject, stand. Um, in this world of speeching and convincing people to do stuff, another really good word can be advocate. So we all have a moral duty to advocate for those who cannot fight for themselves. We all have a moral duty to educate, fight, advocate, reject, dismiss, stand. So there's some lovely verb choices we can make to complete our we all have a moral duty to, that challenge to do something. Now, what I've also done here to extend those ideas, though, is just again using this lovely little connective that we all have a moral duty to reject fashion that is tainted by the exploitation of children. We all have a moral duty to stand against child labour so that all children can be the lucky ones. So that introduces what we call the next clause, a relative clause, to just amplify why we're rejecting fashion, what we're standing against. So actually, we've ended with amplification here. Okay, and the word that can be a good way to amplify. Brilliant. So how have I linked the last sentence of my speech to the first sentence? I've got that lucky one again. So sometimes purposeful repetition can work really well. So I have used that word lucky more than once, but that's purposeful repetition to create cohesion. And where it says the repetition of the opening phrase, we all have an example. Sorry, the repetition of the opening phrase, we all have. It's an example of anaphora. Okay, the repetition of a phrase at the beginning of a series of sentences. So Leote saying what things are not, hyperporia, the question and answer, and anaphora then saying that we all have a moral duty, that repetition of that phrase. Now, you can't tell me what you would edit, change, or improve. But actually, the reason I put that question there is we have to start thinking critically about what we're writing. Now, critical sometimes gets really misinterpreted. When we hear the idea of a critic, we believe it's always going to be negative. Okay, but actually, we're not talking about what's wrong with our speeches when we start to refine them. We're thinking about what's missing. Okay, now that's a really important way to see the review process. This is not a critical, oh, my speech is rubbish, I've done that wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. When we start to think about change, it's about what's missing, what's stopping me from hitting a higher mark, where am I missing the mark of high star, where am I missing the mark of punctuation, where am I missing the mark? Now that doesn't mean you've done anything wrong, because when you're missing something, you just got to put it in. Okay, so I don't want you to think about the critical kind of refining process that we're going to move on to, particularly tomorrow and Thursday, as I've done something wrong. None of you have done anything wrong. Even if you haven't done anything yet, you haven't done anything wrong. You're just missing a speech. And we just got to fill in that missing space with something, guys. Okay, so once you've marked those, what I just want to draw attention to for the rest of your time today. So again, this for some of you, I don't want you to spend longer than 15 minutes, okay? And then you're going to have tomorrow and the next day to also build on this. So I want you to think about the next three sections of your speech: your climax, your falling action, and your ending. So reread what part of your own speech you've done so far, your character setting and rising action, and then begin to think about the next three stages. In other words, writing the next three sections of your speech. Again, use time today. As I said, it might be that you plan these sections before you write them. So what's your emotional point going to be? Have you got enough research to do the falling action section? Can you actually, if you research what ways that we can change plastic pollution, things we could do to end homelessness, things we could do to create equality in speech? Now, if you were taking a topic like racism, and I know some of you have been. So in the action, falling action, there is a lot of speculation and information out there about what we can do to change. That some people have talked about it's listening, it's changing maybe policy, it's tackling systemic racism. So you will find that there's potentially almost so much that people are suggesting we can do to change. So in that falling action thing, I would look for 1 or 2 things. I wouldn't go bigger than 3. I wouldn't just list hundreds of things, because that can also be overwhelming. You know, if you gave people a list of 100 things they need to do differently to end plastic pollution, people might look at that list and think that's too much. So when you're thinking about the falling action, have you got the research to help you write that section? What can be achieved if we change? What can people do to change? If not, you might need to spend your time today doing a little bit of research. Okay, guys, so make sure you've answered all the questions and then think about the next sections of your speech. Okay, now when we come back tomorrow, I'm going to take us through those sections and begin to make sure we've just got key elements there, give you a kind of like a criteria for success, show you some examples of what other people have been writing that's really good. But we've got the next 2 hours this week, really, with a little bit of guidance from me to really write speeches where we've got nothing missing, where we've really thought about creating a speech where we really hit the mark. Okay, my lovelies? So I'll see you tomorrow.